And good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Mondays at Noon. I'm Dr. Molly Pepper. I'm the Associate Dean here in the School of Business, and this is our weekly forum where we gather as a community to talk about various things that are important to us. We are recording this session, and it will be available on the School of Business YouTube channel. Today, we've got three guests, Paul Buller, Chris Stevens, and Dan Stewart. And what these three men have in common is they have all served the School of Business as the director of the Hogan Entrepreneurial Leadership Program. So we're going to be talking to them about the program and how it has developed and changed over the years and where it's going for the future. But before we talk with them, we're going to take a moment to pause and reflect, and then to engage in two short networking exercises. So to begin with a reflection, because this is a forum in which we gather as a community, I'm going to ask that we take a moment and reflect on that community. So please join me in just a moment of reflection and gratitude for the Gonzaga community and the connection that we have to one another. Thank you. Next, we're going to hold our breakout groups to allow for some networking, and afterward, I'll interview our panel of guests. So welcome back, everyone. I hope that the breakout rooms gave you the chance to network a little bit, maybe meet someone new, or catch up, with someone you already knew. So now let's speak with our panel. So first of all, Paul, Chris, and Dan, thank you all for being here. I'm looking forward to hearing the whole story of the Hogan Entrepreneurial Leadership Program. I feel like I already know a lot about it, but there's always new things to learn. So I think what I want to do is do this in a linear fashion and begin our discussion with Dr. Paul Buller, who was our first director of the Hogan program, and then talk with Chris Stevens, who led the program during its middle years, and then Dr. Dan Stewart about what's happening now. So if anyone has questions as we go along, I encourage you to put to the chat, and we'll find a way to ask them. So Paul Buller, would you get us started? Tell us about the vision for the Hogan program at the beginning, and then how did it get started?
Thanks, Molly. I think this is a great idea to have the three of us together to talk a little bit about the Hogan Entrepreneurial Leadership Program. I think it's important for me to describe the context in which we started. The first entering class was in 2000, the year 2000. That's an important date. One of the things that is important is that this is the first entrepreneurship degree program at Gonzaga. And if you know anything, back into the 1990s, we had the dot-com run-up, and just about everybody was doing entrepreneurship in the universities. Most business schools had an entrepreneurship program. We were a little bit late in the game, and so the Hogan program was really our first degree program in entrepreneurship. The dot-com boom and bust peaked in January 2000. That was the highest level of the Dow and the NASDAQ, which began a decline. NASDAQ lost 80% of its value by 2002. So, in a way, we were a little bit crazy starting an entrepreneurship program at that time, because there were some questions about the academic integrity and value of an entrepreneurship education. A lot of those questions were sort of swirling around academia. The vision for the Hogan program came in a chance meeting between Father Robert Spitzer, who became Gonzaga's president in 1998, fall of 1998, and Mr. Ed Hogan, and I'll talk a little bit about that meeting, but Father Spitzer came in 1998 as our president. It wasn't a great time for the university in terms of enrollment and the finances. He had a strategic plan called Momentum 2007, at which he wanted to create some new momentum and initiatives for the university. And the byline of that plan was developing inspired leaders for the common good. And so his vision for the university was to kind of elevate the kinds of things Gonzaga had already been doing, and that is forming men and women for others in the Jesuit tradition. But this idea of inspired leadership was one of the things he brought to Gonzaga. Well, prior to coming to Gonzaga, Father Spitzer was head of he founded an ethics institute at Seattle University, and he was quite well known as a speaker and a consultant among CEOs in industry. And he gave talks to groups of CEOs. And one talk that he gave in 1999 was to a group of Catholic CEOs. And in the audience was Mr. Ed Hogan. They had never met before. Ed was just one of the audience. He came up after Father's inspiring talk and had a few questions for Father. They kind of hit it off a little bit in terms of common ideas. And shortly after there, Mr. Hogan called Father Spitzer and said, I've sold my business, which was a very successful, he and his wife had established a very successful travel business. He'd sold the business. He created what's called the Hogan Family Foundation. I would like to invest in a program. And so they collaborated on an idea. And the idea was to attract bright, energized students to Gonzaga from any major who would then go off and use their education and gifts to make the world a better place. It was a very lofty kind of Jesuit idea. And so, that was just a chance encounter, and those two clicked, and Mr. Hogan says, Father, why don't you send me a proposal? So Father, within 48 hours, had a 2-page proposal on Mr. Hogan's desk. He agreed, and so that was the beginning of the idea. In late fall 1999, Father Spitzer called me into his office and asked me if I would consider taking this idea. He said, I have an idea and a check, which is a great place to start a program. And he asked me if I'd be willing to take this on. I thought about it. I talked with my wife and a few colleagues, and in about 24 hours, I said, yes, I'd be willing to take it on. So that was kind of the beginning of the idea. How we developed that idea was first to do some benchmarking. And so during Christmas break that year, I visited a couple of colleagues at the University of Washington and University of Southern California. We benchmarked some other programs, leading programs around the country. And it turns out that almost all entrepreneurship programs are pretty much the same. Most of them at that time were MBA level. Those that were undergraduate focused on the junior senior year. They almost all had the same curriculum. And so we wanted to do something distinctive. We put together a design team that included Father Spitzer, the AVP, who was Jesuit at that time, the deans of business, arts and sciences, and engineering, a couple of faculty members. And so that was the design team. And we also had a board of entrepreneurs that Father Spitzer put together that helped provide input. And we came up with the basic model of the Hogan program, which included 4 distinctive parts. The first was an honors program. This was a unique idea. I don't think there still is an honors model entrepreneurship program in the country, but this was important to Father Spitzer and for building the reputation of the university. The idea was to attract high-achieving, academic-oriented students. The second component was that any major could participate. It was across campus. There were a few cross-campus programs, not many. As I say, most of them were in the business school. And the other component was going to be a 4-year curriculum. A lot of the programs that existed, the entrepreneurship classes really started in the junior and senior years. it's interesting because we received a lot of people who said those two things are dumb ideas, having an honors model and having freshmen involved. I never apologize for either one of those. They're very, we all know that they're very bright people who are also very creative, innovative, entrepreneurial, and leaders. And in my experience, freshmen are just as creative and innovative and entrepreneurial as some of the MBA students that I've had. In fact, in some cases, more innovative and creative because they're not encumbered with all of the analytics that you get in an MBA program. The third component was immersion in entrepreneurial context. And so the idea was that students would learn by rubbing shoulders with entrepreneurs through, they were all required to do an internship, which was really not done as a common practice at Gonzaga, at least. We were going to have site visits and networking events and service projects and competitions and all of those things that immerse students in experiential learning. And the fourth and most important component was the Jesuit values and heritage. We wanted students that would use their unique talents and gifts to make the world a better place. And so we emphasized ethics and leadership and common good as the driving values of the program. So those four components together, honors concept for across campus, immersion in entrepreneurial experience, and Jesuit values really made this a distinctive program from the get-go. So with that, we presented this model. This was in February 2000. We presented this model to the Academic Council in March. Now, all the academics in the room will realize that this was a highly accelerated move. I mean, we started talking about this idea in November, and we're presenting to the Academic Council in March 2000. And so it was very accelerated. We received approval. It wasn't easy, but we received approval. And so it was my job to sort of make it happen. And it came along about, our goal was to have 25 students enter the program in February. I'm sorry, in September 2000. By mid-May, we had 4 students. And so what we did is we sent letters to the students who were already enrolled at Gonzaga because they were the students that we had to draw from that year. So I went to Father Spitzer in mid-May. I said, Father, we have 4 students. And he said, and I said, I don't think we could do this. I don't think we could reach our target of 25 by September. He says, he basically in essence said, Paul, be patient and pray. And so I did. I was patient and I prayed. And in September, we welcomed our first class of 23 students in the fall. So that it really was a fast, furious journey, but we got there.
That is excellent, excellent context. And like I said, I learned a lot that I didn't know about the Hogan program. I also want to mention or ask, when this started, you just ran it out of your office, right? We didn't have the big Hogan.
Right. Yeah. I'll tell you a little bit. It was just me and an assistant and the students. The first 23 students. And I have to tell you that the early growth of the program is due largely to a great board, great students who really helped us formulate. We had a four-year program on paper, but we didn't really know what we were doing. My discipline's not entrepreneurship. I'm a good teacher, I'm a good implementer, but we had to learn as we went, and the students were very instrumental. So we had leadership teams in every successive class. Then we got the sophomores and the juniors and the seniors. The very first board meeting, someone suggested on the board that we have a business plan competition, and that was the furthest from my mind. And I sort of tried to put the squash on that, and the board members said, we'll put up the money and we'll get the reviewers and we'll help you put it together. And so we had our first business plan competition the first year. We added the new venture lab in the junior year due to the insistence and benefaction of Fred Brown, who was a trustee and a serial entrepreneur. He believed that students have to rub shoulders with real entrepreneurs. And so the new venture lab was started in 2002. We also had the internships coming online that junior year. And so we hired a man by the name of Norm Letha, who started helping supervise the new venture lab as well as the internships. Norm probably touched as many student lives in a very deep way, more than anybody that has been associated with the Hogan program, with the possible exception of Nicole Cooney, who's been there nearly that amount of time. So, all of these things happened because we had great board members, we had great students, and eventually I decided to turn over the leadership of the program to Tom Tilford, who was a former trustee, and he continued to carry it forth. But I'm sort of anxious to hear from Chris and Dan in terms of their story. But I really think the basic model has stood the test of time, and it's only gotten better over time.
Well, thank you. I think you've set it up well as far as the, how it began and the context of what it was trying to achieve. And of course, I think Tom Tilford ran it for a year after you. Is that correct, Paul? And then it was 2 years.
I think Tom was director for about 5 or 6 years.
Yeah. Okay. So quite a while.
Yep.
And then Dr. Chris Stevens became the director. And so I'm going to turn it over to him. Chris, if you would talk about how it changed and developed over your tenure as director.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Molly. This program is very close to my heart. It was actually, I think, the most challenging decision I made at Gonzaga to step down from running it, and one that I constantly look back on, and from a context of was that the right thing to do, because I miss the program, I miss the students. When I joined the program, as Paul had indicated, Tom had been running the program. Paul had been serving as the academic director of the program, and in the background advising on the academic roles of stuff. And one of the things that Dean Barnes at the time had indicated was that he desired to try to unify those two things again, right? To have a faculty member in that position so that we could have sort of one central focus. My goal when I took over the program was not to break anything. Paul had done an outstanding job of setting everything up, of figuring out how we were going to do stuff. The program had about 10 years worth of history at that point. And as Paul's already indicated, that my experience with Hogan was almost exclusively a function of the people that we had involved in it. Paul had done everything that we needed done in terms of setting that up so that we had the right infrastructure, we had the right support. He and Dean Barnes and Father Spitzer had done an amazing job of leveraging the financial resources so that we knew that the program had a place to be and had sort of a brand identity. And we'd made somebody had made the right decisions about who to put in the administrative roles that we had in there. Because I think, I'd echo what Paul said. I couldn't have done anything without Nicole and Norm. Norm lived and breathed this program and the students and their stories, and was so invested in it sometimes to the point that you have to kick him out of your office, right? Because he'd get really excited talking about something, and I'd be like, and this is a great story, but I've got other things to do. But Norm was just so into these student stories, right? Like every story was a great one, and he would coach everybody. And Nicole's been the sort of the glue that's bound this whole thing together. I mean, she predated me. She's still there, and she was sort of the conscience of the program, right? The person that students would talk to most often, the person who knew where everything was, the person who knew where the money was, all of these things, right? And between Norm and Nicole, I walked into a situation where I just had a fantastic team to work with. But the students are the thing that I think has constantly brought me back to Hogan, and it's how passionately, especially the students in those first 10 or 12 years when Paul and Tom ran it, those students who were part of something completely new, they were so passionate about giving back. And so even now on the NVL board, a quarter of the people who serve as NVL board members are students. So that we were at one point where the entire NVL board was former Hogan students. I still talk to the Hogan students that I had in my cohorts on a regular basis. And that Hogan experience is maybe more important to some of them than the Gonzaga experience was, to be quite honest. I mean, just being in the room with those same people for 3 or 4 years, going through that whole process. So when I took it over, it was what I would think of in entrepreneurial definitions as a slightly mature organization at that point, right? We'd had about 10 years worth of history. The board that Paul had put together, we'd had a lot of people exit that board. We brought some new people on. We had about 10 years worth of data about what was working and what we thought we could develop. And so we tried to take on just a handful of things. I think during the time I was there, we shortened the program from a 4-year program to a 3-year program. And we did that for a couple of reasons. That freshman experience was really cool, right? Bringing them in, having them in the classroom for one of the very first classes that they would have at Gonzaga. And then having, usually with Dr. Steverson, having them in the final Hogan class in that final semester. It was really neat to have that sort of cradle to grave attachment to the students. But one of the things that we found difficult as the program got a little bit, as the program aged a little bit, was that we were having a more difficult time identifying students at the start who were capable of making it through all 4 years. This is a pretty intense program. I think the commonality from Paul to myself to Norm while he ran it to Dan is that we hold the students to a really high standard. And so the expectation is you got to keep up. We're not slowing down. And we would have students who sometimes selected out of high school to go into Hogan because it was another one of those honors opportunities, right? And for students who were looking for opportunities to distinguish themselves, sometimes they didn't know what the workload was going to be, despite all of our efforts to tell them. And when I came in, Hogan had a pretty high washout factor. We were probably losing about 15 to 20% of our students over the 4-year period. And so we thought that if we went back one more year, gave them a little bit more time to get used to sort of college and the process there, and took them from the freshman population, that we'd have a little bit of data about how they were performing in college and make sure that they were comfortable with the workload. And then we'd also be able to crunch the schedule. It used to be that we missed them for the second semester of their freshman and their sophomore years, just because we couldn't pack enough classes in. And we kind of didn't want to let go curricularly, right? We wanted to take them in as sophomores and have them in a class every semester so we could keep moving forward. And so we made that transition. It was really, and then we did some things with regards to how we funded the program and how we made sure that we held on to money for a long time. I think early on in the process, Paul had a lot of building to do, and there was a lot that money needed to be spent on. And one of the things that I think Tom and I really tried to do when we ran it was hold on to the money to make sure that we had a lifeline that was going to keep us moving down the road. So yeah, I mean, I didn't try to change a whole lot because I thought that we were really well set up, and I think it was a testament to Paul's vision, to Paul and the board's vision, because I know Paul won't like it if I just say him in that, But to Paul and the board's vision about sort of that you've got to have all these pieces, right? If you're going to have an effective academic program, it can't just be, let's throw some classes together. It had to be, let's create the experiential stuff. Let's have a board to advise. Let's have the NVL, which is an amazing organization that really doesn't ever get as much attention as it should. And figure out how we build all those pieces together, right? And that's what gave students the opportunity to do a whole bunch of things as they wanted to. And that's why they continue to engage. I mean, last week I was in the 401 class, the senior incubation class. It's being taught by 2 Hogan alums, Cole and Gaina, right? I was in an NVL meeting last week with 2 other Hogan alums. And so like, I mean, they come back because there were parts of it that engaged with who they were. And who they want to be, and they can find ways to mentor other students with that. So that's my thing.
Okay, great, thank you. Good perspective on those middle years and running a mature organization. And great points about, you know, it's not just a group of classes. It is an academic program, but it's more than classes. So let's move over to Dan Stewart, the current director of the Hogan Entrepreneurial Leadership Program. Tell us what's happening now. What's the vision for the future?
Oh, well, I came after Norm. So wait, was Norm was right after Chris, correct? So when Chris stepped down, Norm was Norm didn't want to do it full time, but Norm agreed to stick on. First, he only actually agreed to do it 1 year because he wanted to make sure that we found a new director that, you know, he actually wanted to be able to approve the next director, and he wanted to feel comfortable on his way out. And I was lucky enough that not only did Norm approve of me, but then I was able to talk him into staying for another year. I was fairly uncomfortable with him just walking off without at least showing me some of the ropes. I had been on the Hogan board in the past, so I was somewhat familiar with it. I was on the board for a few years, but that's much different than being inside and seeing how the program operates and understanding how the NVL and the curricular side work together. So Norm was actually able to stick on. I didn't get him for a full year, but he stuck around for a semester and helped to recruit Cole in. So Cole actually came in and took what was Norm's role for about a decade before that. So Norm was really smart in setting up the program with people he thought would maintain the culture that he had helped establish along with Paul in the previous decade. And I guess that's one of our challenges is, you know, if you want to talk about the program today and looking into the future is maintaining this culture of excellence that we have, but while adapting the program to changes that are happening within the university and within the business community around us. So it's you know, as both Chris and Paul mentioned, we're very fortunate to get very high caliber students, but our culture right now is one where the students aren't coming in and performing for their professors. The students are coming in and they're I don't know, they're cooperatively competitive. I'm not sure the best way to frame it, but they're performing for each other. When you're in that culture of excellence and you look around the room and you realize, heck, everybody else here is a superstar, they push each other because they want to be part of that club, and it's almost as if they don't want to let each other down, and they want to be part of this stream of outstanding graduates that we have. So I feel like when I took over, it was just somebody handed me the keys to the shiny sports car, and I was just able to take the keys and hop in the sports car. And now, you know, I spent the last 5 years trying to make sure it doesn't go off the road. And for the first couple of years, I would describe my experience as trying to learn and make sure that I didn't drive the sports car into the ditch. But now I think the challenges are around adaptation. So some of the things that, and I'll talk about the 3 things that popped up to mind first when we were talking about the sort of evolution of the program and where it's having to evolve right now. The one is we have a different student profile now than we had at the beginning of the program. As a university, I'll just call it the Mark Few effect. You know, as Mark Few has been so spectacularly successful in basketball that we're on ESPN every week, and students all over the West Coast see us every week. And so we have a lot of brand, and we get a much higher caliber of student than when I started. I mean, I started in 2006 here, and the student profile has changed dramatically since then. We're sort of edging in that competitive range. And so the profile of the Hogan students has increased proportionally as well. So now we're talking about students who they're not only smart, but they're driven and motivated, but they have a lot of options. They had options where they wanted to go to college, but they also have a lot of options when they leave here because the university has grown in stature along with the stature of the students. So it's one of our constant challenges is trying to deal with students who purposely were set up to be in a program that was different. As Paul was talking about the purposeful, the intentional creation of a program that was interdisciplinary. And when I started, I always felt this pressure. I said, well, why can't we be like the other big entrepreneurship programs? Well, you look at those programs and they're full of business majors. Our program is not full of business majors. It's less than half. It's typically about a third or 40%, but it's always less than half. And so I'm always having to step back and remind myself, you're not competing against traditional programs because it was always intended to be interdisciplinary, to be Jesuit, to be something that emphasizes social entrepreneurship and social good. So part of what we do is we realize some of our metrics are always going to be different. So we don't need to compete around some of the metrics that they say the ranking systems look at. So, the ranking systems are always like, well, how many millions of dollars did your students get in funding their startups, and how many business plan competitions did they win? And that turned out to be not very interesting to our students. Our students aren't interested in just winning money in business plan competitions going to startups, because they're very capable students. Our students, last year we sent them to medical school, law school, dental school, Notre Dame for entrepreneurship, PhD programs. So those are the kind of things that are on the radar. Going into startups and doing sort of traditional school things aren't what they're thinking of. And it would be irresponsible of us to try to push them towards the metrics that are important for entrepreneurship rankings, instead of letting them do the things that God has given them the talent to do and laid forth these career paths for them. So I guess that's part of what we do is we're adapting to the profile of very high caliber students across all disciplines that we get. Another of our challenges that wasn't there 5 years ago is the emergence of the entrepreneurship and innovation concentration. I think it's probably more than 5 years old now, but it was a startup in its own right, and facing the same kind of challenges that Paul would have faced very early on in this program. But we've had we have an issue now. That's a very strong program. Its student population is probably about the same as ours, and there's sort of a bifurcated role that we now have to do with E&I coexisting with us. One is we have to be able to differentiate ourselves from the E&I program. Both Nicole and I field a lot of questions every year from students who are interested in our program. They want to know, how are you different than the entrepreneurship and innovation concentration? So we have to maintain that differentiation, and we have to be able to explain it. But that's our internal audience. At the same time, we're coexisting with the external audience of the business community and the academic community, where it really doesn't do any favors to have multiple entrepreneurship programs in their minds. They don't, to them, Gonzaga and entrepreneurship, and therefore, why muddy the waters by having two programs with two missions? They just want to know Gonzaga and entrepreneurship. So I've been working hard with Todd over the last few years to make sure that when we go out to the community, and I'm not talking about the local Spokane community, but the academic community as well, that they're seeing Gonzaga entrepreneurship. They're not seeing Gonzaga E&I and Gonzaga Hogan. We can explain to them as we get into deeper discussion that there's Hogan and there's E&I, but we're trying to brand entrepreneurship as a strength for the university. And we're also trying to pull in some of the engineering components to that as well, and just trying to I'm not going to say put forward the picture that's bigger than we are, because we actually have very good numbers if you look at student enrollments compared to a lot of similar sized schools. So we have a surprisingly big FTE enrollment in entrepreneurship across all the disciplines. So one of our challenges now is making sure that we can brand Gonzaga and entrepreneurship in a coherent way to outsiders. And, if you had to ask me the differences between ours, I always tell people, well, we're an honors program. It's always intended to be. And it must, we emphasize leadership and innovation. So our goal is to make you a better fill in the blank by focusing on your understanding of leadership and innovation as you walk out the door. So when I say fill in the blank, I mean a better engineer or accountant or sociologist or teacher, whatever it is that you're always intending to be. And I think our third issue looking forward is trying to keep pace with what's happening around us in the university district. And this is where we've been leaning on Cole in the last couple of years. That when Paul started the program, there wasn't, WSU had a little bit of a presence across the river, but not a very big presence. And since then, they've grown, and WSU has gotten rid of pretty much everything that's not healthcare related. But what they do have that's healthcare related, they also are interested in innovation. Now we've got the medical partnership with UW, and we've got Whitworth growing across the river as well. So there's all these things that are happening around us, and we've been approached both by UW and WSU and it's them trying to figure out, well, how does Gonzaga fit into their plans for the future? And our challenge right now is to make sure that we stay on their radar. And it would be easy for them. They've got a lot of resources. They've got they've got a lot of brand as well. So it'd be easier for them if they wanted to cause problems for us. So part of what Cole and I do is we sit down with people from WSU and UW and make sure we're on the radar and make sure that make sure it's clear to them what we can offer to them, so that we're seen as a complement to the U district, not something that's going to be just stepped over as that U district develops, at least when it comes to entrepreneurship and innovation. And one of our challenges, I guess, is we don't have the graduate level of education or knowledge in the healthcare sciences. So it's one of those things where we're probably going to have to rely on alliances and partnerships for us to maintain that level of interaction and partnership with those entities across the river. And Cole, if you want to chime in on that, feel free to do so. But I consider that to be one of our big current challenges. But again, I still have the keys to the sports car, so there's nothing wrong with the program. It's just adapting the program.
Yeah, there's definitely been a huge change in both the ecosystem in Spokane as far as startups and entrepreneurship, and as well in the education sphere. And there's a lot of kind of long-term interesting relationships between the universities and those aspects. And so it's been interesting trying to kind of fight more higher level partnership type things between the universities with our experiences on the ground. And so luckily we have some really great partners in the entrepreneurship community, as well as kind of the different universities and the resources that they provide in the entrepreneurship space. So we're working on some pretty cool stuff going forward. Yeah, it's exciting stuff.
Excellent. And Dan, part of what you said there took me back to Father Spitzer, who was the one who got it all started. Who, if you've ever heard him speak, he always speaks of the difference between being ego comparative versus ego contributive. We shouldn't be comparing ourselves to others. We should be looking to what our unique contribution is. And it's exactly what you described. Like, what is the unique contribution that this program is making? So we're almost out of time, and I just want to throw out my favorite question at the end of any interview, which is, what question didn't I ask? Looking at the three directors and Nicole and Cole, anything that needs to be said or you wanted to say that we didn't hear? Okay, everyone's kind of giving me this, shaking their heads. So we're just about at time, and I just want to thank our panelists for doing such a great job, for being willing to come and tell the story of the Hogan program. I joined the university in 2003, so I remember the early days, but I still learned quite a bit there, and I hope everyone else did as well. So thank you, first of all, panelists and the rest of you. Thanks for coming to Mondays at Noon. Next week is careers in accounting. So that'll be interesting. The accounting discipline will sort of take over Mondays at Noon talk about those. Then we have Founders Day, and then we're back the following week with our career and professional development colleagues to talk about things we can be doing in the career development area. So again, thank you for being here, and I hope to see you next week.